All right, so today, y'all know I've already given you the introduction, and even though I don't have to do a great introduction, so I've already given my intro today, and today is a more candid discussion because I am talking to my grandfather, and I get this privilege to talk to my grandfather on camera that we've never done. I don't know if any of the grandchildren have done that, so I'm so excited that I get to do this. And so, Granddaddy, welcome to the podcast, and you get to be interviewed by your first grandchild.
I am greatly privileged to have this to happen. It is something new.
Yeah, yeah. So we stayed up later tonight. So if y'all see us, we're sitting at the kitchen table because everybody else has gone to sleep, and we stayed up to talk a little bit longer. So I want to just ask you one: when you found out, before anything, when you found out you was going to be a grandfather, how was that? How did you feel?
Excited and apprehensive at the same time because I never thought about the idea of being a grandfather at that time.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I just had 5 kids,
Mm-hmm.
and the youngest was around about 3 years old.
Wow.
And when my daughter came home from school and said that that I was going to be a grandfather,
Yeah.
I was excited about being a grandfather, but apprehensive about it happening so fast.
So how many do you have now?
I've got 6 kids now.
Yeah.
I have one. My youngest daughter is 9 months younger than you.
Yeah. Well, that's the children. How many grandchildren do you have?
Grandkids, I believe it's a total of 8. I believe it is.
Yeah. Okay.
If I'm counting straight.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm the oldest of all.
And you're the oldest
I'm
of
the
my
oldest.
grandkids.
Yeah. So I'm the one who messed up the most.
Yeah. Well, you were my first grandson.
Yeah.
And then the next ones were all girls.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I had 3 more girls besides you at that time. Later after you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had 2 more grandsons. Then another granddaughter.
Yeah.
I think I've got them all right.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you said, for those who are watching or listening, and you said about your youngest daughter is 9 months younger than me.
Yes.
So, which made an interesting dynamic for us growing up together, because I didn't call them uncle or aunt because they were more like brothers and sisters.
Correct.
Yeah, growing up. So, growing up for you, if you wouldn't mind telling the people how old you are now.
I am 77, almost 78.
Yeah. What was it like just growing up? And we talked about some things earlier about some of the things you saw when you were a teenager, as far as the March on Washington and the sit-ins and all of that. What was that like growing up? When did you, I guess, growing up, find or experience or even realize that there were color differences?
Didn't really pay attention to color difference until probably I got into middle school. And growing up, I lived in a very small town. I think the population of that town is about 3,000. And there was a city school a block from my house. I could go to my front porch and sit on my front porch. I could cross over it was a high school, grade school, and all combination at that time. And the grade school I went to was about probably about a mile away.
Okay.
And I'd walk to school every day.
Mm-hmm.
To that grade school.
Yeah.
And we'd be a bunch of us. We'd get together and we'd walk to that grade school.
Yeah.
And we never thought anything about going to school there. It was all black, and the teachers were all black, and so we had two classes. You'd have a first and second grade be together, third and fourth would be together, and the fifth and sixth was together. So then when you went to the 7th grade, you went to middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they only had one middle school in the whole county for minorities. And so that was in the city of Drakesboro, where we lived in the city of Greenville.
Yeah.
And so the whole county would go there. Uh, was unable to go to the school across the street from the house. I was chauffeur driven to school.
Mm-hmm. You said chauffeur.
Chauffeur driven,
Yeah,
yes.
tell people what the chauffeur was.
I'd have a nice chauffeur. He'd drive up. It'd be quite a few of us who'd be wanting to go to the same school, and we'd all get above this big yellow limousine. And we'd all ride it. We were privileged. We would get to ride to school, and that was around about 15 miles away. But away we went. And so we'd go city to city, picking up other kids in the limousine, and we'd all get the limousine driven to school.
I never considered the school bus as a limousine until you said that. I will never look at it the same way. That I will tell the children from now on that they're privileged to be picked up.
Chauffeur driven.
Yeah.
We didn't have to walk. We had to walk to grade school. We got to ride to middle school and high school.
So you even mentioned earlier in the conversation about how even when you went to go visit your friends, you couldn't go through the front door. You had to go through the back door.
Well, my mother had bought, while Dad was in the military, had bought the property that we lived in. At the time that she bought the property, it was at the edge of the city limits. And so the business district of this town had grown around my mother and a few of her friends' houses. So we were right in the middle of the business district, not in the middle of the residential district. And so there was only 4 houses there in the business district. The rest were all businesses. And so all of my friends, their parents worked in the city, in businesses, in the government, and stuff like that. And since my house was there, I had basketball goal, we had table tennis, we had horseshoes, we had everything. So all the kids around would all come to my house and play every day all during the summer. So they had no place else to go. It was almost like a daycare center, but it wasn't a daycare center. It was my private house, and they come and visit me. And so the only thing was that I was basically the only black boy there. And the rest of them were all white coming to visit there, so they would come to my house. And when I would go to their house to visit them, being Kentucky was still in the South, if you were black and not working there, you would go around to the back door. You would not go to the front door. The front door was reserved for their white visitors to come in through.
Wow.
So once you got in, you had the same, you were treated just like anybody else. But that was just a way that it was done at that time.
Yeah. Were your friends, even when you went to go visit them at home, as you got older, did you ever experience any of your friends change when they got older? Or did they kind of still remain the same as it relates to?
Our relationship stayed forever. Even today, we still have the same relationship. We still communicate with one another.
Good. Because sometimes people will, stories of people who change out in public, versus private. So I'm glad you're friends.
That never changed. Being that where I lived at, everybody knew me, and even all the store owners, everybody around knew my father, my mother, and myself. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, it was indifferent. The rest of the minorities in the county were differently treated because they lived on a different section of town and where we lived at. And so they didn't know them, but they knew us. Yeah.
So you've mentioned that you have however many grandchildren, but you were an only child.
I'm an only child.
So how did that affect you growing up, just being an only child? Did you ever feel like you wanted other kids, or did you just...
Oh, yes.
Really?
Being an only child is a difficult situation because you're constantly wanting someone to play with. Yeah. When you have brothers and sisters, you have your friends are right there in the house with you. When the only friends you have at home is your parents. Yeah. And that's a different relationship.
Yeah. So you feel like that's why you had so many, because you wanted to make sure they didn't.
It gave you a different outlook on life, and so therefore you were easy to make friends because you wanted other people that you could.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that being an only child, because I'm not an only child, I do have friends who are only children. Do you feel like that gave you a closer relationship with your parents, though?
Yes, it did that. We had, a close relationship with my father. Yeah. My mother was a disciplinarian.
Okay.
And we had a close relationship, but
I can't imagine.
it was a completely different relationship than that. When Dad got ready to discipline me, it was quite different.
Okay.
We would go out to a little building we had out back. Is where Dad would talk. When he went out to have a private talk with me,
Okay.
There was a razor strap out there.
Now, explain the razor strap.
Well, in the old days, when you went to the barber's, he had a barber's chair here. He had a strap that was into the barber's chair where he would take and sharpen his razors on when he got ready to do the shades with. That was a nice thick little belt.
So he would that visual was there for discipline.
That visit was not only there for discipline. If the vision didn't take care of it, it got used.
Okay.
So it was quite different.
Yeah.
In those days, you didn't say, "If you spank me, I'm going to call the cops," because first of all, there was no phone.
Well, okay.
Now I could have went out and screamed for a cop,
So,
but
what year was that? Like, when there was no phone, like, how did you communicate?
well, my next door neighbor, she had a phone,
Okay.
and I would have girls to call me.
At her
At
house.
my next door neighbors, she would come to the back door and she'd holler and she would tell me that I had a phone call. So I'd go to her house and talk to the girls very shortly.
Okay.
And that was it. I got my first phone. I guess I was in the 10th grade.
Wow.
Is when I got my first phone.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody watching could imagine that, not having a phone until the 10th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we were unique. We didn't have a party line. Most of the houses had a party line, but
Now, the party line is where,
the party line is where when you call the operator,
and then they connect you.
they connect you. But the thing is that when they ring, say for instance, if it's a 2-party line, you might get 2 rings for one and 1 ring for the other, or however many parties on the party line. So the full party line, it'll be 4 rings in your phone for you know that's for you to pick up. But the other people on the other party can pick up and listen to your conversation.
So they could listen to your conversation.
They can listen to your conversation.
Would they report what they heard?
Well, they're secretly listening to your conversation because it's not important. When you think somebody's listening, you'll tell them to get off the line.
Okay.
So this is a private conversation.
So
and then you hear the phone hang up.
Okay. I was like, so how would you know they were on the line? That's what I was wondering.
You hear them hang up after you call them out.
So did that happen a lot of them listening?
That happened quite a bit. Now, being that we were in the business district, there weren't any party lines in the business district.
Okay.
And so therefore we were given a private line.
Okay.
And so we didn't have that problem.
Yeah. So,
but the girls I would call would have that problem.
Okay. Because they would have somebody listening.
Yeah, they'd have somebody listen to the phone. You'd hear them telling someone to get off the lines. And then you hear the phone hang up.
So, being an only child, going next door to answer the phone or get a phone call and all that, when it came to music, because your dad, my great-grandfather,
musician,
was a musician. And it was always funny because we always said it skipped to and came to me. Now it's gone to my son as well. How did that feel like? Did you want to grow up like watching him play, or did you want to have that type of, because you did sports, I think, too.
I did sports and I also played.
Yeah, you played.
Yeah, I even played for the junior choir.
Okay. Yeah. But it wasn't as a natural gift as it was like a...
No, not as natural as it was for Dad. Dad had to learn to read music. I was taught music from the time I was 7 years of age on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I took piano lessons.
Yeah. So, how did that feel, like not having the natural, and you wanted the natural, but you had to get it learned?
No, it didn't.
It didn't bother you?
It didn't bother me. All of my relatives were all musicians. From my grandfather on down were all musicians. And so they were all natural with the guitars.
Both singing and playing? Or just
both singing and playing.
Wow.
Now I could naturally play the drums, but I couldn't naturally play the piano.
Yeah. Yeah. being raised in, and a lot of people don't consider Kentucky the South or in some areas, but the part that you were in, the Western Kentucky, is much different than Central Kentucky,
Yeah,
climate wise.
Western Kentucky, as it says, united we stand, divided we fall. Kentucky was divided up into two states. The western part of Kentucky is more southern.
Yes.
The eastern and northern part of Kentucky is more Midwestern.
Okay.
And so therefore, when you come to the western part of Kentucky, it's a different language spoke than what is spoken in the northern and the eastern section of Kentucky.
Yeah. Because when I went to Mississippi and lived there for a few years, there were lots of similarities between Western Kentucky and Mississippi. Like it was almost like I had moved back to Western Kentucky. I didn't realize how similar it was. The food, language, the hospitality, the community aspect. Not saying that other parts of Kentucky did not have that type of hospitality, but it really was strong.
Quite different.
Yeah.
Western Kentucky, your minorities got to know each other from basically Elizabethtown all the way to Paducah. And you're talking 75 miles difference there. And you got to know all the communities were small. And so you got to know everybody from one place to the other.
Yeah.
Because when you play basketball and things, you go to play a basketball game in this town, that always be a dance or something afterwards. And so you got a chance to communicate with those people. You got to know the boys and the girls from that. And so, unlike in your section where you grew up at, it was not that way.
Yeah.
I mean, yours was all metropolitan areas. And so therefore, you didn't get to know your town you did, but most of the towns around, you didn't know all the people in the towns.
Yeah. I want to go back to music for a second, because you said something that made me think about it. When you talked about meeting the girls and boys at dances and stuff, what type of music were you listening to when you danced into?
Well, it was two different type of music in those days.
Okay.
It was country music in the South, and then there was we called it rock and roll. They didn't call our music rock and roll. But there was black rock and roll and there was white rock and roll.
Okay. Who was doing the black rock and roll?
The blacks.
Yeah.
The black singers and things like this had a different rhythm, but the whites would listen to our music.
Be influenced by it.
And they loved and influenced by our music. But the recording studios at the time would take and steal our music. So a black would make it very popular. They would have one of their favorite white singers to come in and take it by the title and the word, but it was completely different song when you heard it. And when you went to buy it, you had to see who was singing it as to whether you wanted to buy it or not.
Yeah, I would hear lots of stories about that, whether it be Chuck Berry or Little Richard or any of those ones. So how did that affect you all in your community? Like when people say, that's our song, like what would y'all say? Like when you hear somebody else doing it?
Well, it became common.
Okay.
And that was their way of getting away from the country music. Because before that point, most of their music was country music until they started stealing ours, and they still put that country stand on it.
Yeah.
And when we got together, it would be having, our dances or whatever. Well, then, they loved the way we danced. The way they danced didn't look right. And so you started noticing bandstand, which is one of the most popular. Dick Clark's bandstand was one of the most popular ones that were the younger generation was watching. That started being in Philadelphia and moved from Philadelphia to California, to Los Angeles. But when it was in Philadelphia, it was Philadelphia Bandstand and Soul Train.
Yeah.
Which was the blacks version of that.
And Soul Train didn't come out till when?
Right, not too long after Dick Clark, yeah.
Okay, really?
But it was the blacks had the Soul Train, and the whites had Dick Clark.
Yeah.
And occasionally we'd get together and have dance-offs.
Did you go to any of those?
No, that was all mostly in Philadelphia.
Yeah. How did it, just even as you continue to grow up, what type of similarities do you see in or maybe differences that you see in your generation of younger people that you see now in some of the younger people or you don't see? Like what are some of the similarities or that you see?
Well, the similarities on the way that your mom and I were raised are quite similar.
Okay.
Because from where we grew up at, not being in a predominantly black neighborhood, we had more of the Caucasian friends and things like that, as well as the black friends. And so therefore we would, you're all known each other and you're all good friends with each other. As you grew up, in my time, when you became an adult is when the separation came about. Before that adult, you were still good friends and things like that. But then by the time that it came for me to go to college, most of the blacks have been going to Kentucky State.
Okay.
The white colleges were just starting to open up. And I didn't pay much attention to that, but most of my white friends were all going to Western.
Okay.
And so that was the reason I went to Western, not because it had just opened up, because I never even knew that it just opened up. I just went there because my friends were saying, hey, let's go to Western, and we all got together and said, let's go to Western.
Yeah. Was it, did you deal with any type of hardship there at Western?
No, because we were the first there. And being when you're of a very small amount, well, then you're not threatening. And so people accept you. Is when they're afraid of you is when there's a larger amount and they don't know what's going to happen. And when you're just a very few, it's only, like I said, when there's only 10 of you, yeah. Well, then, they don't look at you that way. Yeah. They never even really think about you as being different. We had Japanese, we had other nationalities and things there also. Mm-hmm. And so therefore you were just like them. As a matter of fact, it was probably more Orientals there than it was blacks.
Wow.
And they had came over from their countries to come in to Western, go to school.
So would you say that your generation was more tight-knit, closer than our generation might be?
Yes. In my time, you didn't have games, Playboy, not whatever you call those, PlayStation, yeah. We didn't have Playboys either. But
yes, PlayStation.
we didn't have PlayStations and all of those, to play with.
Yeah.
We played outdoor games.
Yeah.
And you did, even when we had, you'd get to go to house parties. Mm. And the house parties would mostly be outside. And you'd have your record players and everything out playing the music, and everybody would be outside, dancing, and you'd have sodas and things like that.
Yeah.
There were no drugs. Yeah. Drugs hadn't been, in my generation, if you used drugs, you were considered stupid. Mm. It wasn't accepted.
Wow.
Because only people that were crazy, that we consider crazy, that would be using drugs.
Yeah. So you saw it evolve and come into communities.
Vietnam War brought it to the United States. Before Vietnam War, I would say in the Midwest and this part of the country, drugs, it was grown and made into rope. People didn't smoke it. Mm. That's what you made ropes out of.
Yeah, I've never heard that part.
Pardon
that
me?
That they made ropes out of it.
Not nylon ropes. When you saw your ropes that were made out of hemp. Mm-hmm. And this was the best sold rope that there was. That's the ropes that were made before. Then after Vietnam brought marijuana here, and it was a more potent marijuana. The ones that were growing here wasn't that potent. And so when they came into more potent stuff they get high on, then they stopped making ropes out of it because it looked just alike. You couldn't tell the difference between the two as they were growing up. And so they did away with it just to keep it from being grown.
Yeah.
They were making clothes out of it before. They was making rope out of it before. It was a great product. And this naturally grows in Kentucky.
So how was it introduced in that way?
People coming back from Vietnam, things like that.
And you served.
I served. you had your city, your people that was coming in from your cities and stuff like that. When they got to Vietnam, you know, people were selling marijuana very cheap. What they call the dime bag, I think that's the phrase they use back here for a dime bag, and that probably came from over there. Probably a bag about yay big, but it probably cost about a dime over there, something like that. And then they would take and make the cigarettes. The people were selling them. Would take and buy American cigarettes. They paid $10 per carton of American cigarettes, where they were costing $1 a carton. And then they would take the tobacco out, put marijuana in them, and then put the tobacco back in the ends, pack them back up and sell them to the GIs. So if they got caught with them, they had regular cigarettes, and so they got hooked on it. Alcohol was cheaper than marijuana. Why would you want to go with something you go get high on when you can get high on something that's legal for a lot less money than what you're going to pay for something that's illegal? But because when somebody says you can't have something, then you want it. Yeah. And that was the concept. They says this is illegal, you can't have it. And so therefore when they start sneaking it back in, and then from where I understand it, in Kentucky, things like that, they were taking the seeds and stuff from the marijuana over there and coming back and hooking in with the hemp and stuff we was having back here and growing a more potent marijuana here.
Well, how was that to serve in Vietnam? What was that like? Did you, not just even before service, was that at that time an understood or requirement for drafting? Like everybody had to at that time, or how did you even get?
Middle class and the poor served in the war. The rich left the country. They were going to Europe and they was going to Canada and their place else. If they could afford it, they left before they got drafted. And then their parents would say they didn't know where they were at for them. And the ones that couldn't afford to leave, you were stuck back and got drafted, and therefore you went where Uncle Sam.
So that was very common. People would leave.
People would leave. Jimmy Carter was the one that brought back the ones that left. Gave them a clemency. They would come back and they would have to give community service for 6 months or a year or something like that to be able to get it wiped out for their records. But before Jimmy Carter, they couldn't come back in the country.
Wow. So you were drafted, and was that a...
No, I was, when I got out of college, being from a small community like Muhlenberg County, the draft board notified me that, hey, says, we're going to be sending you out a draft notice very shortly. If you've got someplace you want to go, you need to go. Because if you don't, there's an Army uniform waiting for you.
Was that a scary experience? Was that?
Well, being the dad had served in the Navy. And so my grandfather, his grandfather had been a colonel in the U.S. Army in World War I. And so therefore, we were considered to be, military type family.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was that? What that experience like?
Well, when I joined the Navy, went to basic training, and came back, and you gave you a choice of where you wanted to go, and I said anywhere East Coast. Thinking about the East Coast of the United States, I got the East Coast of Japan.
Wow.
The USS Ajax on the East Coast of Japan.
So you
that was my first ship, huh?
You arrived and was like, this is not where I planned to go.
Well, when they gave me the orders, they said, you're lucky. They said, you're on the USS Never Sail. I said, I'm on the what? They said, yes, it's a repair ship. It says it's never gone anyplace. I just gotten through with basic training in school. And so I said, that's probably going to be pretty good. I said, I'll get to spend some time there in Japan. I flew into Tokyo, hitchhiked a flight down to Sasebo, Japan, and got down there. The ship was gone. The ship was never supposed to sail. It was gone. I chased it around 5 countries before I found it.
How did you get from all the different countries?
Just want to see 130 and go to the next place you heard it was at. With your sea bag. You get there, I'm sorry, it's gone. I caught it in the Philippines.
Wow. Yeah, which is where you met.
But that was later, much later. Yeah. I caught it in the Philippines, and it was getting ready to leave the Philippines when I caught it in the Philippines.
Yeah.
We were heading from there to Taiwan.
Wow.
But the Vietnam War gave it a new mission. Before the Vietnam War, it had no reason to leave.
Yeah.
And then they brought all the 7th Fleet to
Yeah.
Vietnam over there, and so they had to have someone to fix all the ships. So we would go to where they could come back and have R&R, and we repaired the ships while they were there.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Never thinking about, I joined so I wouldn't go to Vietnam. Then after I'd been on the Ajax for 4 years, then I got sent to Vietnam. But I got sent to Pendleton first.
Okay.
Because I'd asked for shore duty. I had never, except for schools, I'd never been stationed in the United States. So I figured it'd be time to be stationed in the United States. I figured I'd been overseas long enough, and I didn't get to see my parents. So unless I want to take a 30-day leave and, and come back.
So how was it? Because I've heard many stories of people who said that once they served and then they came back to the United States, it was like a shock, or there was one way they were treated serving and a different way you treated back.
Well, it's not only just serving, being the only place that you were considered black. They didn't call us black in those days. It was not, that word was not used, and the word Afro-American wasn't used. It was colored. I don't know what color we were, but
yeah.
But that was the phrase that they referred to us as colored in those days. Well, once you left the United States, you weren't. I mean, an American was an American.
So it wasn't classified by
whatever color race you were an American. Although some countries didn't believe you were an American because they had not seen. I was in Sasebo, where my ship was homeported. Everybody knew what black and whites looked like. Well, my friends and I, there's very few blacks on my ship, we're mostly predominantly white. And so most of the friends I worked with were all white, and we all went out in about 10-speed bicycles, and we'd ride out of the country. We'd take a 3-day weekend, and we would go out for about a 25 or 30-mile ride and stay in hotels and things as we got out. We went out, was going towards Nagasaki. So we stopped at this one hotel half between Sasebo and Nagasaki. I was the only black. We went in, and in Japan, the modesty is not like it is in the United States. You would go into like a swimming pool, but only be waist high. And that's where you soaked. You would take and soap yourself on the deck over here. Rinse yourself off, and then you go soak in the tub. And this would be whole families. And, nobody had clothes on. So you didn't have that modesty. Well, we were there, and I was coming out, and Mama's son came out with this great big beautiful white towel. And I came back up, and she was handing the other guy's towel. And she came up to me, and she started drying me off with this white towel. And then she'd look at the towel, and she'd rub some more on me. And she'd look at the towel, and she'd rub some more on me. And in English, I spoke Japanese limitedly, but I spoke Japanese at that time. Kokujin was the word for black. And she would say that it would not come off. And she kept rubbing me and trying to get it off. She had never seen a minority. She'd seen whites, but she'd never seen a minority. So she just knew that I had dyed myself. And she was trying to get that dye.
Wow.
So that was the difference between, there wasn't a lot of minorities seen,
Wow. So she, I guess, eventually figured it out.
Well, she figured it out, and I told her, I said, no, so it don't come off. I said, what you see, this is me.
Yeah. Wow. I've never heard that story. So coming back to the United States, and of course, later on, because you said you went back when you got married. Well, found grandmama later on. Yeah. So how did that go?
Well, we came back. It was not that big of a deal because your grandmother and I are, matter of fact, her tan may be sometimes, I've got a deeper tan since I've been in Florida, but at the time her tan was darker than my tan.
Yeah.
And so we came back, most people didn't pay much attention because then You only in Kentucky there was only considered two races. There was white and there was black.
Yeah.
And you came in from another country. I don't care what country. If you were Japanese, they'd probably consider you black.
Mm-hmm.
You really wasn't.
Wow.
They really didn't think of a minority. A minority was a minority, and predominantly white, and so therefore,
Yeah. Did you experience, like, even as a different couple? Did you experience anything even with that?
No,
Yeah.
no, not in Greenville.
Good.
Because in Greenville, like I said, when we came back, matter of fact, I had one of the jewelry stores when we came back as a wedding gift. They gave us a beautiful china set and everything like that as a wedding gift. Because I had, before, when I was in school, I started an entrepreneurship of a janitorial service where I cleaned stores and cleaned businesses and stuff like that. And this I did to pay my way through college. And so therefore I did that work for them.
Yeah.
And so therefore they came in, they met the wife and took her in to do some tour. They just loved her. Yeah. And they gave us that as a present.
Yeah, we talked about earlier about how entrepreneurship has been in our family for a very, very long time. Do you feel that some of this generation of this time do we understand the concept of hard work and what it takes to build things, and not just build, things that are tangible, but, how long it takes to invest in yourself and, education. You're a proponent. I remember every time I was talking to you, going back to school for something, I mean, you've always believed in education and hard work and all of that, not just serving the country, but you've all, worked hard for your family, all that. Do you feel that still exists now, that people are still as committed to the hard work, or are we more interested in overnight,
well, it's
quick
not
success?
When I was growing up, we were poor and didn't know it. I don't know if you know what that means or not. Yes. Everybody was kind of poor, but still, most of my friends, their parents had bought them cars. They were on the white perspective, and their parents, they had money, owned businesses, and it bought them cars. My dad told me if I wanted a car, I better buy it for myself. So I bought my first car, which was a Morse Minor.
Now, what's that? I don't know what they do.
You've heard of an MG.
Okay.
MG stands for Morse Garage.
Okay.
A Morse Minor looks like a Volkswagen,
okay,
but it's got an engine in the front instead of an engine in the back. It's got a 3-cylinder engine. Okay. I paid $400 for that, and it was 3 years old.
Just through working?
Huh?
For working?
No, it was beautiful. It was a
nice.
I'm
saying you got it probably because you worked for it.
Yeah, I worked and made the money. The minimum wage is 35 cents an hour.
35 cents an hour.
And so, being an entrepreneur and having my own business, I didn't work per hour. I worked per job. And so, therefore, I was able to save enough money to buy that, as well as pay for my college. Most of my college, I thought I was paying for all of it, except my dad was kicking in money on the side.
Yeah. Do you feel that we have that concept?
The problem is today is that most parents, whether it be white, black, whatever, they feel bad because they didn't have everything they wanted when they were growing up, and they grew up on the edge of recession, and coming right out of the Depression, and so therefore they try to give their kids everything. So most kids today do not earn everything they get; they are given the things, and so therefore they get the mentality that you owe me. I wasn't given anything. And my kids were not giving anything. And nor my daughter, you wasn't giving anything.
Yeah. So do you think that there should be a balance between the two? Because I do understand in some regard the concept of I don't want you to struggle as I did. But in that, how do you balance, I don't want you to struggle as I did. I don't want to give you everything, but I want to make sure that you understand the concept of work.
And the value of money.
Yes.
You have to understand what money is all about. And it's okay to give your kids things when they're younger, but when they get to the age where you want them to know what things are about. Say their first car. Have them to have some incentive on that first car. They got to pay the insurance on it or whatever the case may be. It just can't be all whether they are living on allowance from you to pay for everything. They've got to go out and earn their own money to find out where money comes from. Because if they don't know where money comes from, easy come, easy go.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to manage money, and you can't learn how to manage money if somebody just gives it to you.
Yeah, so whether that be money, whether that be jobs, whether that be success of any kind, the concept of working for it, understanding the discipline that's required for it, all of that is important for our generation as
Right.
well. It's not just something that goes out of style or goes away. It's something that we need to maintain or to sometimes maybe bring back.
Right. Well, it's you in your generation is finding out the generation just before your generation didn't quite understand the concept of all that as far as the earning capacity. So therefore, their capacity was, since that money had been easy come, they figured that they wanted more and more money and not reinvest in money to make money. And so therefore, from where their parents had passed them down businesses, they didn't make the businesses. Their parents had passed them down from generation to generation. And so therefore, they got to the idea that we want to make the most profit out of this money, out of this businesses. So therefore, in order for me to do that, I'm going to another country where the labor is so cheap that instead of me paying, $5 on the hour, I'm getting it for 10 cents on the hour.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I'm making more money for my company. And so most of your factories moved overseas.
Yeah.
And so then the generation here, they had no factories to work in. And so it was a whole different ballgame. So what, you either go into welfare, college, to be able to work in the economy you got here, or something along that line. And so the brown shirt, the non-dress shirt, that's starting to disappear because people are finding out that you can't just wear a shirt and tie all your time, all life. Somebody's got to have something else besides shirt and tie to bring money in.
Yes. Do you feel like sometimes when you see some of the
Sonny Coco.
Okay. When you see some of the generation now, and a lot of the younger people and a lot of our generation out protesting and standing up for causes and making our voice heard about things that matter, how similar is that to what you experience, and some of the protest and sit-ins and different things that you experienced at growing up?
That was our concept of protesting. We were tired of the idea that we had to take the jobs that only nobody else wanted. Education was the only way out of that my time coming along. And so therefore, you worked for minimum wage or a little bit above minimum wage if you were a minority. And they wanted to keep the factories and things to where they just hired the more upper middle class. And the lower middle class had to take the jobs, like service stations and all the other things that, didn't pay anything.
Yeah.
And you couldn't, in my time, if you lived in the South, you couldn't go into a restaurant and eat. You had to go to the back door, and they would hand you out the food at the back door, out of the back window, out the back door, and you could sit outside on the table, rain or shine, and you eat that food. You go to a bus station. You had, in northern Kentucky and eastern Kentucky, the bus stations were bus stations. But you were in southern Kentucky, it was the same concept it was in the rest of the South. You had mixed bus stations. The white sat here, the black sat in the back, not in the same room, but they had a wall in between you. and you sit back there and wait till your bus got there.
You said one story about how you were able to sit anywhere you wanted to on the bus until you got to Nashville. I think Tennessee. To Tennessee.
When you cross the Tennessee state line, then you were in the deep South, and so therefore you had to move to the back 2 or 3 seats of the bus. Would be Greyhounds, Trailways, or whatever it was. You had to move to that point. And so therefore, and same thing on trains. They had certain sections that you had to move from one car back to a car strictly for blacks when you crossed that state line. And then when you got back there, then if it wasn't a seat, you get off and wait for the next bus. Yeah. Although you paid your way to Florida, when you crossed that state line, that bus may be going straight to Florida. You had to get out and catch another bus and maybe go in a certain place. Then catch another bus, because you were a minority.
But if you weren't, you could ride all the way through.
If you want, you could ride all the way through. And that didn't matter if you were in uniform or non-uniform. Because minorities wasn't respected in uniforms. Not in the South. Matter of fact, you had so many that had gone in and fought in Vietnam, things like that. And they come back and they got beat up because they were wearing an American uniform. And they had been dying for their country.
Do you have any of your friends that experienced that?
Yes, I did. I had one of my friends that he came back and he left the country and never came back until, Jerry, that was in the 70s. He went back, lived in the Philippines, stayed back there because of what was happening to him in Greenville, Mississippi. He didn't believe when they told him that it had changed. He came back in the 70s and found out that Greenville that's the 80s, and found out that Greenville had changed, that it was minority. The chief of police was black. And he couldn't believe it because they had been so mistreated when he came back, when he got out in the 70s and came back home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he became a policeman himself.
Wow. Is that, I know that you went to the March on Washington. Is that what was the feeling and what the climate was, even when y'all went to DC, like, wanting to make your voice heard, wanting to be known and seen?
Well, the younger generation, period. And when most people think about the marches we had, they think about the marches as being all black. That wasn't the case. It was just as many whites and Jews and the other that was all mixed in there with us. I mean, it was, a generation. Everybody was fighting, for that period because they wanted things to change. And when we had my bus, like I said, it was 5 buses that went from Western to the March on Washington with 10 blacks at the campus.
Wow.
And so that was it, so it was that many going just for the experience of going in and seeing what it was like. I went because I wanted to go and protest. Yeah. As well as I went to set on the set-ins and all things like this. We went to protest to get rid of the facts that somebody was telling you can't do this. Yeah. We want to show that, that we can do this. Yeah. And no matter what you do, we're going to accomplish what we want to accomplish.
Yeah. Do you see much change now from then?
Starting to change back again. Because up until last year, we didn't have much demonstrations going on at all. Minorities are starting to get, we didn't have what you guys have now. We didn't have police shooting minorities. That didn't happen. You might get hit in the head with the billy club, but you didn't get shot and killed. That's only been in your generation time. That's when they started pulling blacks over. Least little chance they got, they shot and killed. They found out they could do it and get away with it, and they just started going from one to the other. And it was more in the north and the east and the west than it was in the south.
What now do you not want to see die in our generation that y'all had growing up? Like, what should we hold on to?
The camaraderie. And it's getting back again. You're noticing that a lot. You'll be getting a lot more friends that get to know each other and stay together in bigger towns and things like that. Which for a long time it got to be you didn't know who your next door neighbor was. But back in when I was growing up, you knew who your next door neighbor was when you were kids. You had that camaraderie, and like I said, that camaraderie stay and grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another thing I'm hating to see go away. My generation, we revolved around the church.
Yeah.
The younger generation, I say the younger generation because it's not just wrong, it's some of them 50 years of age and on down. The church is faded out. They're not as close to the church where that before you would say that about 75% of the people went to church, especially women. It wasn't so much with the men, with the younger generation did, but when they grew up, the men didn't go as much as the women. But the women mostly always went to church. Now the women don't always go to church. It's common things. They're not as much in church as they were. Churches were full before. Yeah. And that was because times were hard.
Do you feel like I was going to actually allude to that. Do you feel like when people needed something to believe,
right,
they were more connected to faith or principles?
And they prayed for something. Now when you have everything, you don't have to pray for something. You're not saying I can only get this through God. Now you're saying I'll make my own money. I'd buy it. I don't have to worry about what God gives it to me or not.
So how do we as a community do people have to go through hardships to start having something to believe again? Or what do you feel can get that being the core and center again? Because I don't believe it's just even church attendance, as it is having that faith that's centering.
Well, that's the main thing. In today's time, when I came along, parents took you to church. Now parents don't take their kids to church. I've got a grandson that doesn't know really what church is about. Because his mother and father did not take him to church. They grew up in the church and then they kind of faded away from it.
Do you see that those who have not had that type of faith centering in the world at large, do you feel that it has caused them not to have a compass to guide their life?
Well, you first of all, you have to know about God. And you don't see the churches today like where when I was coming along, there was constantly revivals. All the time there was something going on to draw people in. You would bring, call it missionaries. You bring people in who was coming in just, to come in and preach instead of preaching and stuff like that to try to, build the church. The churches would bring them in. They would increase their population and stuff like that. They would pay this minister, and this minister would go on to the next one, and he'd be done brought a whole bunch. While he was there for a week, you may have 10 or 15 people to join the church. You don't see that much anymore. Every once in a while you see it, maybe about once a year, but it's not constantly going on. And you're getting back now to have your ministerial associations. Back when I grew up, all your churches were kind of united. You had one job, the churches, ministers had one job, but to bring them in. And the youth was something that they were constantly having something going on in every Sunday. There was something going on in church. Every Saturday there was something going on in the church to bring the youth in.
So basically the church community, faith community was the center of, oftentimes when you look back and many of the documentaries or even hear stories about movements, civil rights or anything, faith was always at the center. That was the part that drew people together.
That was the lead of our movement. You would, if it hadn't been for the religious bodies, they kind of founded all this where everybody would meet at to learn about this, it never would have happened. I mean, Martin Luther King, he was the one that kind of got it all together. He wasn't the one that organized to begin with, but he was the great one that kind of figured how to get it as a movement going on in the church communities.
Yeah.
And so therefore this was through the ministerial associations of the minorities that this came about.
Yeah. Yeah. So in some regard, I believe that possibly leaders need to do a better job of making it a hub, a center of things that are a pipeline
Yes.
of community engagement, making sure that we're bringing people back to what matters.
Right. Yeah. And even your politicians before, church was one of the things that they used to be able to get their messages and things across.
Yeah.
They didn't just, go out on the courthouse square. They'd meet in the different churches and things like that. And so therefore,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we could talk forever about how things have evolved, but I wanted to see, from your, grandchildren to children to this generation, what words would you say to for wisdom purposes? So what we should be able to be learning and grabbing what, from this. One reason I want to have the conversation because you've seen so much, you've witnessed and experienced so much, and for now, how do we continue to grow and develop and hold on to family and not lose our sense of identity and all that stuff, so what words would you say, when we're looking back at this, your grandchildren, all of us, are looking back at this 10 years from now, what type of words or things do we need to be leaning forward,
We're going to have to slow down. Basically now, the generation today have no patience. And take marriage, for instance. Even when a couple gets married, they don't realize that there's going to be arguments and fights and things like this. I don't mean drag out fights. I mean the disagreements. And so many times now, when they have a disagreement, the first thing they say is, well, let's get divorced. And after you say that enough times, it kind of registers in, so maybe we should get divorced. And they do get divorced. You've got to have patience with each other to know that when you get married, it's for life. It's not for tomorrow, next month. It's for life, through good and through bad. No matter what comes up, you're supposed to rely on each other. And you've got to have patience with each other. And this is the day I'd like to see that happen more with these generations, and know that you can have patience, talk things out, and not just realize that, just because I got an argument today, that tomorrow there's something better on the other side. Yeah. Because when you get divorced from this one today, the next one's going to be even easier to get rid of. And the next one after that's going to be even easier than that to get rid of. It's hard to stay together. It's a job. Yeah. Yeah. And you have to take it as a job and work it as a job. And like I said, I'm going on 54 years next month. Yeah. So it's
54 years.
54 years.
Some people stay together 54 days.
Yeah.
So you think, so for us, we need to learn patience.
Patience.
Yeah.
You have to have patience. And education, I don't mean word be formal education, word education. We have to study to find out things. We just can't take everything. Everybody takes now, they look at TV and says, this is the truth. So we don't investigate or study to see how things work out. We just take it for granted. Whether it's right or whether it's wrong, we just take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And half the time, it's not true information. Yeah. So we don't investigate the information. We just say, it's coming from the TV, so therefore it's got to be true. Yeah. And that's not a fact.
Yeah.
So we have to look into things. Jobs. There's always been jobs available. Anybody wanted jobs. You've heard people that say, well, I can't find a job. It's because you didn't look for a job. You looked for a job. You didn't look for a job. And so therefore, you can always train yourself to get into something else. Yeah. If one thing's not working, you can be retrained. You can retrain yourself or be retrained to take another. You may have to take a cut and pay in order to learn something the way you want to do it. But you take a cut and pay just to learn that, and once you've learned it, then you can demand what pay you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question. One day, I still remember my great grandfather, your dad, and I don't remember grandmama Viola number one, because she died when I was two.
She died on your second birthday.
On my second birthday. I see the pictures of her, but I don't remember her much. But my great grandfather, I think I don't know, 13, 12, something.
He died at the age of 80.
Yeah.
And so you would have been, you would have been a teenager.
Yeah, around that time. But,
yeah.
Yeah, but so in terms of a legacy, what would you want years from now? My youngest is 14 now, but years from now, as your grandchildren, your children, those of us who have, we have all types of stories and things, about what would you want your legacy for all of us to have grabbed and held on to, as far as your legacy and what that has meant and what it means to us. Of course, we all have our different stories and stuff, but what would you want us to hold on to and to say, this, I want this said about me 20, 30 years from now?
The love of family. I've always believed that the family should stick together, that we should always be tight and depend upon each and every one of us, that we're one big family unit, and that we're not just individuals, we're one big family unit, and we will always be able to take care of each other. And so as long as we love each other, you probably experienced it, it's been around it, to where there's so many families that doesn't have the family unity that we have. Yeah. And being an only child, and this has been the main thing that I've always wanted, is to have family together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to stay together even when we're gone. I want family to stay together. Yeah. Dad wanted family to stay together. He was an only child.
Well, we got a lot of family to keep together.
we have a lot of family.
Yeah.
I've gone from being an only child to having 6 of them.
Yeah. Lots of family, lots of laughter,
yes.
Lots of noise.
Lots of noise and lots of fun when we all get together.
Lots of fun. Yeah, and that's family. Well, I appreciate you having this conversation with me, and and being I just thought about it as, of course, I got older, of course, but thinking about having you just talk, and just what that's been, your experience has been like, so that as we continue to grow and look back on it, and remember, these different things, and make sure that we're not swaying away, but that we have that center, whatever that looks like for us. So thank you for that. Any last words you got?
Well, it has been so great having you here with me as my first grandson.
Yes.
And our first time that we've spent really much time together as you as an adult.
Yeah.
We spent many times you growing up, but not since you've been married as an adult.
Yeah.
It's been a great experience just being here and to getting to know my young grandson.
Yeah.
My first grandson.
Yeah.
My first great grandson.
First great. Yeah.
First great grandson.